welcome back to Close to Broke. My name is Kieran, and today this is a pretty nice place. I'm currently at my cousin's graduation from high school, which is in Vegas. Why do I bring this up? Because it's being held at the Orleans Arena. And from what I understand, Orleans got a pretty fun 1-2 or whatever, 1-3 game, and today is Monday, so that means Bankroll Challenge is on. Let's head over to the poker room and see if we can't mix it up and make a little bit of money. Well, we're gonna have to scratch the idea of going to the Orleans. As you guys can see, we're now back to my house. Dude, Vegas gets too hot. It was like 107 degrees today. The one big pro about living where I live is I live literally 2 minutes from the Red Rock Casino, which is a locals place, a locals joint here in Vegas. If you're familiar with it, you've seen Brad Owen post videos from there. I'm sure you've seen other people post videos from there, but today it's my turn. Really excited to head over there now, check out the property, as that's where I'm gonna imagine I play a bulk of this series is gonna be there. So it's a 1-2, 300 cap. Let's hop into this game. I'm excited, and I'll bring you guys along with me. Hopefully we have a nice session. Today you're going to be finding us at the Red Rock. We were going to play at the Orleans, but as you folks heard briefly, I didn't have the opportunity to make it there as I had to get home. This Las Vegas weather is really, the heat is getting to me. Middle position raises to $7. The button decides to make the call. I'm in the big blind. We look down at King 4 hearts for $5 more. Seems fine. I go ahead and make the call, and we're going off to the flop. That comes Ace Jack 7 with 2 hearts. We flop the nut flush draw. The initial raiser decides to bet for $20. The button, who's an older gentleman, decides to make the call. I find myself here in the big blind with a decision. Sure, we can just make the call, but I think that in these lower stake games, with the effective stack sizes of around, 70 big blinds at this point or whatever it is, I'm going to go ahead and play this a little more aggressively, I suppose. I decide to raise to $60. One of my opponents has around 210, which is the initial raiser, and my other opponent to the right actually has somewhere in the neighborhood of, like I said, 140 or 120. Anyways, like I said, I decide to raise because I want to play my out of position flush draw a little more aggressively this time around. Luckily for us, both opponents fold, and that's a good start for us. I think the one thing that I'm going to have to come to understanding, well, I guess the two things playing these lower stakes is that, one, people do not like the full top pair, and two, isolating is going to print me big blinds pre-flop. And I just got to keep remembering that. Even though it may seem like I'm being like a bully, or to them I might be super loose or aggressive, isolating and playing these limpers in position is going to be so powerful to printing money, like I said, during this challenge. We find ourselves in the next situation where there are 3 limps to me. I looked on a Queen 8 of clubs here from the button. Again, speaking of what we just talked about, isolating is probably going to be key, especially in position. Unfortunately, I end up chickening out, just like my English is just getting out of there. Not very good. Supposedly this is my first language. I end up just limping. The small blind folds and the big blind isolates to $12. It ends up being called by every limper as it gets to me, and with these pot odds, I can make a flush in straights, I guess. I end up making the call, and we're going off to a flop that comes Queen 10-7 with 2 spades and a club. We flop ourselves top pair as well as a backdoor flush draw. The action ends up surprisingly checking over to me. What I mean by surprise is that the initial raiser doesn't take a stab at it, which is, I guess, understandable because we're 5 ways. But the other thing to mention is that none of the other 3 players, have anything, or maybe not enough to take the lead in the pot. After it's checked to me in position, I decide to bet $25, looking to go about half the size of the pot here. Only the under the gun limper decides to make the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes the 8 of spades. And before I can even think, my opponent, a really nice lady actually, decides to snap jam, which is not great. Our opponent has just around $100. Not outstanding, this is not fun. I do have 2 pair, and there is like a small percent of the chance that I can fold. I actually think about it for a little while, and I actually ask my opponent, do you have a flush here? I promise you I'm not trying to be a nit. I have 2 pair. I have a really good hand. But that was not a good turn card. It was a good turn card and a bad turn card.
It's a good turn card for me.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that much.
How good? 10-8? I hope not. Oh, man. She was kind enough to tell me that she did not have a flush. Well, if that's the case, then I guess that I'm only worried about Jack 9. I think Queen 10 raises the flop. I feel like 10-8 is a fine call, and turning 2 pair makes sense to jam, I guess, sometimes. Anyways, after a pretty long tank, I end up making the call. This is actually a hero call. This is not a very good hand you want to be calling down with. My opponent is kind enough to immediately show so that there's no drama. She shows Jack 9 of clubs. So she does churn herself the straight, and she did not lie. She did not have a flush. Either way, the river comes a 3 of clubs, not improving me. The one thing I should note is that when she says she didn't have a flush, I should have still folded, because if she's willing to admit that, then she knows that she's good anyway. She has to have something good enough to say that, right? Either way, it was too late for me. I couldn't figure it out. And what is pretty much like an ABC fold, I guess. I mean, in my head, it should have been. I end up, donating, I guess, here. Either way, let's move on. In the following hand, we look down at 7-6 of spades after an under the gun decides to limp. I'm going to go ahead and isolate. Like we said, if we're going to be playing these hands, it's better to play them in position and heads up. So I end up isolating to $10. The button decides to make the call, which is not great. The cold calls are never fun, especially when I'm out of position to the player. The limper ends up making the fold, and we're going off to a flop that comes ace, 6, 8, rainbow. With the action onto me, I decide to throw out a BC bet of $15. My opponent makes a call, and we're going off to a turn card that comes a 9 of clubs. Now picking up extra equity, I think that betting here doesn't make much sense. I can represent ace for sure, but it just doesn't complete a lot. I think in time, I'm thinking that if I make my hand, it's going to be hard to get called anyways. And if there's a small chance I can get him to fold second pair, that's fine with me too. So I'm making it $35. My opponent makes a call pretty quickly, and we're going off to a river card that comes with 3 of diamonds. We break out all our draws. Not outstanding. The action onto me, I guess at this point I decide to go with it. I end up making it a $100 bet on the river. Again, I just don't know what I'm representing here. It's hard to imagine that ace king can go 3 streets on this street. On this run out, maybe, but I really don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. It's not a good play. Not a fan of it. My opponent seems to not be a fan of it either, enough so to actually make the call. Unfortunate for us, we let him know we have only one pair. He shows ace jack, so probably never going to get him to fold that hand ever. Doesn't matter what I bet. And it's just unlucky for us there that we played it pretty bad, and we could have lost significantly less. And like we mentioned, I think when he calls a turn, that's a pretty much instant give up on the river. We have showdown value. There's just no point to barrel off on the river. And that's one thing that I promise. When I do something poorly, I want to make sure I mention it so you guys can kind of learn and pick and choose what you guys take from the educational side of this, I guess. So take my mistake and run with it, try to learn from it. All right, so we've lost a couple of pots here. We now find ourselves into the game for $400. Our stack is somewhere around 250 or 200 at this point, I think. Let's get into this next hand because we're in need of a big win here. The low jack decides to limp here. I've been isolating him all night. We look down at 4-3 of hearts here in position on the button. Seems fine. I'm going to go and isolate him to $10 as opposed to the last hand with the suited connectors. This time I'm in position, which is nice for the entirety of the hand. Everyone folds except for the limper, and we're going off to a flop that comes Queen 8-6 with 2 hearts. This is a great flop for me, as well as a okay flop for my range. I don't know what my, the limper's range is. I think he can have like Queen Jack and King Queen, things like that. So when he checks over to me, I decide to bet to build up a pot if we end up getting there. I think we can get a ton of money if we do. He decides to make the call for $10, and we're going off to a turn card that comes with deuce of hearts. Bingo, that's what we were looking for. Now making our flush here. Like I said, as long as a heart doesn't come off on the river, I think I can make some really good money. Like I've mentioned earlier, people are not in the mood to fold. They've not made any big folds today, and I just don't think we're deep enough, considering we only have like 100. Most of the people sitting at the table have like, I don't know, $200 maybe. So I don't think we have a lot of fold equity. The opponent checks over to me. I make it $35. He ends up making the call after a brief moment of thinking. It was actually probably 30 seconds, which is quite a bit of time. We're going off to a river card that is a beautiful 9 of clubs, absolute brick or Rooney. The opponent checks it over to me. This is great news. We're obviously ahead here. And when that's the case, I've got to crank up the aggressiveness. I end up deciding to bet around the size of the pot. $100 to go. Like I mentioned before, I'm trying to make the most money possible, whether that's being game 3 optimal or exploitative, it doesn't matter to me. In these lower stake games, I think the most important thing is to go for value when you have a big value hand. That's why I'm here. I'm on the river in position with a flush. I end up making it $100. My opponent goes deep into the tank, probably half a minute or a minute. That's like a long time for 1-2, I feel like. And he eventually decides to make the call. We roll over our hand, and it is in fact good. And we're shipping over a very well and needed pot in our direction. Things are moving along progressively, almost around black by this point, building a couple little pots here and there, winning some spots in position, easy little c-bet situations. Not a whole lot to report, except for the next hand, which is, again, very interesting and almost vintage 1-2 poker. The one thing I will say, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the average age in my table probably right now is around 65 years old, if I had to guess. So take it as you may. Not a whole lot of spots to make money unless we're lucky enough to run like nuts into second nuts, or somebody has a good top pair and we just get, a pot build. Anyways, like I've mentioned before, I regress. That's just what we're going to have to see in these, lower stake games. And it's my job, and I think I have the ability to really sculpt a game around that and be able to pick these little things up and kind of work with it. And I think I'm good at that. But it's going to take there's a learning curve, and you've got to admit it. Anyways, in this next hand, under the gun, who's an OMC, a super OMC is what my notes say. So just wanted to stress that out there. He makes it 12 bucks from under the gun, folds to me in the big blind. I look down at king 6 of hearts. I almost fold pre-flop, but it's a suited Broadway, so I end up making the call. We're going off to a flop that comes king of diamonds, 4 of hearts, jack of clubs. I check it over to the opponent, who decides to c-bet for 20 bucks. I end up making the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes a 7 of hearts. I check it over to my opponent, and surprisingly, he does not bet. So at this point, I think he has maybe 10s or queens or something like that. So I'm pretty happy about that situation and thinking about going for value on almost any river. The river comes out an 8 of clubs. Like I said, pretty much a brick in my opinion. So I decide to lead out for a pretty larger sizing of $55. My opponent decides to quickly make the call, and he announces he has pocket aces. So, man, he played me like a fiddle. Did not bet there on the turn. I think he could have got maybe at least one more street of value if he bet the turn himself, but he ended up getting more because I bet $55 on the river. Who knows? But well played by him, and I should have known better, honestly. I should have known better. This next hand, the video takes place on the turn. That's when I get my phone out to record, so just bear with me as we kind of catch up on what has happened to this point. Once again, there's 3 limps as it gets over to me on the button. We look down at the old king 7 of hearts here. Earlier, we played a suited, like 10-gapper, suited Broadway a little, passively. This time, I choose to isolate for whatever reason. So I end up making it $15 to go. Folds to the small blind, who's the only other player playing above 150 or 200 big blinds, which is outstanding. He makes it $45 with the 3-bet, folds back to me. Not great with how bad our hand is, but we are suited, which is okay, I guess 4% better. But the other big thing is that there's some massive implied odds as we're both sitting fairly deep here. And I do feel really comfortable playing deep stack poker. I don't know how much this gentleman does, so I end up making the call, which is obviously a loose one. We're going off to a flop that comes 10, 8, 6 with 2 diamonds and a heart. We flop ourselves a gut shot, definitely the range advantage, as well as a backdoor flush draw and an over. With the opponent deciding to c-bet for $65, I think by just jamming here or raising, it's almost full of a ton of like semi-bluffs and, like I said, just bluffs. I think by just calling here, it makes my range look a little stronger. And if I can catch some extra equity on the turn, I think it's very credible for me to check raise, or if he bets, I can raise all in that juncture. But until then, I think just calling is fine. So I end up making the call for $65, and we're going off to a turn card that comes a beautiful jack of hearts. The jack of hearts is like music to my ears, although nobody mentions it out loud. It's almost like that card is audible though. I could see it, I could feel it. This is the best card I can ever hope for. It again just absolutely crushes my range as opposed to my opponent's. If he has a hand like aces, kings, queens, ace king, he hates his life at this point. And if that's the case, that's good for me. The opponent does a really weird thing in my opinion, and he decides to once again bet for $80. The issue I have with his bet here is that, he's just going to get, I think, against me at least. I don't know about the other people here, but you're never going to get called by worse, I feel like. And I just feel like you're going to get a lot of kind of hit back on such a dynamic board. Either way, I end up deciding to jam $265, looking to realize my fold equity here. I feel like jamming 130 bigs into the turn is a really massive play here, and my opponent might not be comfortable with that. Over $200 of what it feels like in extra money to call. My opponent goes deep into the tank before eventually deciding, after like 2 minutes of tanking, on a fold. Thankfully for us, we get that through. We end up showing the table, trying to spark some kind of action here, but spoiler alert, it does not whatsoever. So either way, happy to take that one down without having to go to showdown. Again, this is another video that I'm catching up with. Remember, I have to record these hands as well as take notes. So if I'm a little late on some of these or the recording starts a little late, just bear with me. Anyways, we're going to be cashing up on the flop with a video portion, but I've got to get you guys up to date on what has happened to this point. We are in an interesting situation when the middle position player decides to raise to $12. There's no straddle on, so that's 6x. That's pretty strong, I imagine. Either way, I find myself in the small blind with 10-9 suited. I end up making the call. Everyone else folds, and we're going off to a flop that comes queen, jack, 10. With 2 hearts and a diamond, we flop ourselves an open-ender plus bottom pair. Check it over to my opponent. He c-bets 20, can never fold, so I end up making the call, even though that's a big sizing. We're going off to a turn card that comes a queen of spades. Not great, but it's all right, I suppose. Less likely for my opponent to have a queen here, but again, if he's going to bet, he's probably going to have a pretty strong range, I'd imagine. I check it over to him, and yes, indeed, he decides to bet $20. The same size bet is interesting. He goes from betting like 90% pot to a third pot. Pretty interesting. I don't think I can fold just yet for such a small sizing, as I still have a ton of equity, I feel like. So I end up making the call. We're going off to a river card that comes the 7 of hearts. Not great, as it does not improve us, and it does bring that front door flush draw. I check it over to my opponent, and he pretty quickly checks it back, and he does in fact have a massive hand, as he has 8-9 of diamonds. He flopped himself this straight, took me to value town, and just couldn't get any more value, obviously, with that run out. Unfortunate for us, we could not, improve, I guess. Anyways, we're going to take that shot straight to the chest and move along to the very last hand of the session. In the final hand of the session, finally, we look down at an interesting situation where early position player, who's a very interesting older gentleman who got really carried away with 5-7 offsuit earlier, he decides to raise it up to $8. It's on to me here in the cutoff. We decided to 3-bet to $25 after we looked down at pocket 10s. Great spot. We finally have a premium to 3-bet with. That's outstanding. The small blind decides to make the call. The original raiser decides to make the call as well. We're going off 3 ways to a flop that has about $75 into it. And it comes 8-7 deuce. And it has 2 spades out there. This is a pretty interesting board texture. The reason is I'm either way ahead or way behind. The one thing that I'm worried about is obviously pocket 8s or 7s, like a flop set. But for the most part, I'm hoping one of these guys has pocket 9s or maybe like an ace high that's a little sticky. So when that's the case, my opponents check it over to me. I think by betting somewhere around half pot seems pretty great. It keeps the opportunity for these ace highs to float, and it gives the opportunity for pocket 9s to maybe overplay their hand. I decide to bet $40. Unfortunately, both opponents make the fold, and that's just going to sum up today's session. A lot of big situations that just don't come to fruition, some overplays by me, some misplays by others, but for the most part, just an average day at the 1-2 tables. Hopefully folks enjoyed today's hands. It was a ton of fun bringing them. Either way, let's throw it over to me in person and see how we feel at the end of a very boring session. Just like that, our session comes to a close. Today's session was long and super boring. We had that one big bluff that got through, luckily. Not a whole lot to report. I did not realize before starting this session how hard it's gonna be to make money playing 1-2, 1-3. Not that it's impossible to make a living. Table selection and your player pool is so undervalued and something I didn't consider. Playing 2-3 at the bike, even if there's some pros at the game, there's just some spots. And playing at this local casino, a lot of really slow playing, like a ton of trapping. The game moves slower. And there's a ton of OMCs at like literally the whole table. A table changed once or twice, or like I played hands, but people just kept folding flops. I'd c-bet small, like I'd flop a boat and I bet $3 into $20. And because I know I'm just not gonna get called and people just fold. So that's gonna do it for today's session. We were in for 400 and we were out for $483. So again, just another really small win. That's gonna be okay, considering that little bit of a cooler that we found earlier where we just couldn't make a big fold. I wish I did. I know I have it in me, but I didn't make it. I think we finally broke 70 big blinds over 2 sessions. This is gonna be a rough series. I hope we can make it. We gotta figure this out somehow, right? Either way, we're gonna close it out. See you guys on Wednesday. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. Stay happy, stay healthy, and more importantly, we're gonna go to the tables. Deuces.